On This Week in Enterprise Tech, Microsoft and Google get back into the browser war, BGP has a 512K problem, and Dan Holme from IT Unity comes to talk about SharePoint. Twiet on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twiet, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 104, recorded August 18th, 2014. Dan Holme and IT Unity. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Prosper. Prosper is a peer-to-peer lending marketplace which connects people who are looking to borrow money with those who have money to lend. Visit prosper.com/twit and receive a $50 Visa prepaid card when you get a loan. And by ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter makes hiring faster, easier, and cheaper. Post your job to 50-plus job boards with one click. Try ZipRecruiter with a free 4-day trial now at ZipRecruiter.com/Twiet. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Twiet. Welcome to Twiet, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. But of course, I'm not alone. I'm joined by my all-star, all-geek cast of friends, characters, and engineers, starting with Mr. Brian Chee, the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii. Brian, so good to see you get back from Black Hat. So good to see you back in the chair after your little stormy encounter. How are things for the geek in paradise?
Well, we just finally managed to get the last couple of servers back online, and life is much better. Apparently, the university paid their electric bill.
Yeah, they shut everything down. They did like a power slam on campus, right? That's not good for your gear.
No, it's not just campus. It was basically the entire UH system went down.
Whoa. Whoa.
And unfortunately, some pieces that were supposed to stay up didn't. And unfortunately, that forced me to drive 40 miles out to the Makaha Cable Landing Station to manually reset some gear.
Ugh, that's not a fun trip. But you know what? You're not the only one who gets storms. Another man I know who regularly has to deal with the windy thing is Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, thank you for coming back onto the show. It's always good to see your smiling face. The radio host over at informationweek.com, he's our voice of reason. When we get too heated up, he gives us the enterprise perspective. Curtis, how are you this week?
Padre, I'm doing great. I had a adventure on the way back from Black Cat. Took me almost 24 hours to get home, but did make it. Then went to South Florida, where I was last week. Ended up spending some glorious time down in Big Cypress National Preserve, and now I'm happy to be back here with you and the rest of the Twiet crew.
Well, gentlemen, we got quite a show. We're going to be talking a little bit about a bug, an issue that's come up with the Border Gateway Protocol, and also talk about what you do for your technical content management system. But before that, let's get straight into the blips. The first one comes to us from Microsoft. Now, in a Reddit AMA, a group of developers and programmers from Microsoft's Internet Explorer team urged users to give IE another chance with the upcoming IE 12. Now, Microsoft has seen IE's market share drop from just under 90% in 2005 to just over 58% in 2014. While still holding an impressive market share, the Microsoft team has acknowledged that it largely ignored the development of IE for much of the decade and admitted that they're actually considering changing the name of their browser in order to distance themselves from the poor reputation IE has among the security conscious.
Well, my blip comes from GigaOM. And in this case, the FCC is talking about using beacons and Bluetooth to enhance wireless 911 location services. The big problem is that assisted GPS for enhanced 911 only really works outdoors. And with a goal of 50-meter accuracy, we need something better. Several enterprise-grade Wi-Fi systems have helped, but it's only as accurate as the maps you feed into it. Now, considering most folks don't have access to as-built floor maps of their facilities, this is a problem. What is being proposed is to seed those maps with beacons to dramatically increase the accuracy of the location information in Enhanced 911.
Broadwell's here, and you didn't hear it coming. Intel announced that they've hit production with their new 14-nanometer Broadwell chips, which should allow Intel Core compatibility and performance in fanless devices as thin as 9 millimeters. They get the ultra-skinny design ability by not requiring a fan while maintaining the sort of performance that standard laptop users demand. The new chips are a major improvement over the Haswell's 22-nanometer architecture, and Intel hopes that they'll let product designers paste Intel Inside stickers on the tablets and mobile devices now running ARM processors. Intel says products with Broadwell Inside should start appearing soon, with large volume shipments scheduled by year's end.
If you've ever executed programs off the internet only to be annoyed by piggyback software bundled installs, then rejoice. At the same time that Microsoft was asking the world to please stop thinking of IE as that program that Windows users use once to download Firefox or Chrome, Google was expanding their safe browsing service to include the automatic scanning of downloaded files for PUP, or potentially unwanted programs. Chrome users will get a warning whenever they download software that may attempt to install unwanted crapware or malware. Google claims that the service has been stopping more than 3 million bundled downloads a week during their test, with very few false positives. Well, that's the blips. Let's get straight into the action. We're going to be talking to Brandon Ross from Network Utility Force. He's their chief network architect, about a little issue that's popping up with BGP. But before that, let's take a moment to thank the first sponsor of the Twiet Riot, and it's Prosper. Now, what if I told you that within 72 hours you could have up to $35,000 in your hand? What would you do with it? Would you consolidate your high-rate credit cards? Would you start a business? Would you finally do that home improvement project that you've been putting off year after year after year? Well, what if I told you that by filling out an easy online application and providing a few details, you could see a rate online instantly without ever stepping foot in a bank? Well, that's not fantasy, folks. That's Prosper. Prosper offers low fixed rates, unsecured personal loans, which means no collateral required, and has multi-year terms available. I remember a long time ago when my computer consultation company grew past my resources, I needed cash, which meant I needed a loan from a bank. And that process was as demeaning as it was confusing, showing one bank manager after another who had no idea what the tech world was about, that my business wasn't just cash positive, but profit flush, with just the need for enough cash to hold me over till my contracts were filled. Well, I wish Prosper had existed back then, and I could have saved myself the wear and tear of the bank shuffle and gotten the cash that I needed immediately. Prosper is an innovative peer-to-peer lending process, Silicon Valley's answer to a more modern, community-based personal loan. There are no outrageous fees, no raising interest rates, and yes, you'll never step foot in a bank. Prosper has more than 2 million members, lenders, and borrowers, and over $1 billion in funded loans. Folks, this is peer-to-peer lending, the next step of banking. Prosper connects people who need money with those who have it to loan. It's really that simple. Just go to prosper.com/twit to check your rate instantly without affecting your credit score. Now, for a limited time, Prosper is offering Twit viewers a $50 Visa prepaid card when you get a loan. Go to prosper.com/twit. That's a special site just for our viewers. Up to $35,000 in just 3 days and a $50 Visa prepaid card. Go to prosper.com/twit. And we thank Prosper for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Joining us now is an off guest of This Week in Enterprise Tech, our routing guru, Mr. Brandon Ross, the Chief Network Architect of Network Utility Force. Brandon, I know you're at a conference right now. Where did we find you?
I'm in Savannah, Georgia at the Government Management Information Sciences Conference, the international version of the conference.
That sounds kind of official. We may have to talk about that a little bit later. But right now, let's talk about a little something that's happening with BGP. Recently, there have been reports that BGP is hitting a 512K limit. What does that mean? What is this issue with BGP?
Well, let's be very clear. This is not a bug in BGP or a problem with BGP itself. This is a problem with a particular vendor's implementation of BGP on a particular hardware platform that has a limitation of 512,000 routes.
Okay, wait. Before we go and mention Cisco, because I want that to be anonymous. Let's talk a little bit about what BGP is. So BGP is the Border Gateway Protocol, and we know that it's the way that, well, routers connect to one another on the internet. It maintains a list of the best routes for you to get to a particular server, a particular computer. Now, why is it filling up? What are all these routes doing?
Sure. So as the internet has grown over time, every organization needs to tell the entire world, or at least organizations that have more than one upstream provider, about how to reach them. That's our routes, right? So that's the block of IPv4 addresses that we use on our particular network that we need to tell our upstream providers, and then they need to tell their partners about how to reach our resources on our network. So each time we advertise a route on the internet, it fills up one little slot in that table of routes that we call the global routing table. That global routing table has to be carried by all of the backbone routers across all the service providers in the world, as well as many enterprises that have decided to multi-home and use BGP to decide the best path to reach other entities out on the internet.
What is involved in actually advertising a route? You work with us at Interop, or actually we work with you at Interop. And one of the things that you're responsible for is advertising the routes for Interop's servers to the internet. So when you're setting up a route, what process do you as a system administrator have to undertake?
Sure. I mean, it's a configuration and a piece of equipment, kind of like any other. Once you know the protocol, it's actually fairly straightforward. But you add some configuration information into your router, which often is Cisco, but there are many other vendors out there as well, to say, this is the block of addresses that I use, and here's how to reach me. And there's some other attributes that you can include on that route as well to tell the world about how to reach you and what methods by which you can be reached.
All right, now let's get really simple. What determines whether or not a piece of equipment is being affected by this issue?
So to be extremely specific, what's happening right now is that the SUP 720, which is one of the supervisor cards that Cisco manufactured for their 6500 platform, has a default limitation in IPv4 of 512,000 routes. That's the specific case. Now, this platform is extremely common in the internet. There are many, many of them out there because they're a very kind of low-cost way to have this functionality in your network.
Got it, got it. And we don't see that in many other vendors because they don't have this default 512K limit.
That's right. That's right. There are some other platforms out there that are much less used in the internet that might have a similar limit around the same size, but that's really by coincidence. It's not anything inherent in the protocol. And this platform, I say default because you can make an adjustment to this routing engine, to the supervisor card, so that you can actually handle more IPv4 routes than the default.
Whoa, okay, wait a minute. Because in a lot of the reports that I've read, they were saying how, there's no way to correct this. You're saying that if you have an administrator who actually knows what he's doing, it's easy enough to bypass that default 512K limit.
Yes, but only in the near term. While you can get a few more routes than the 512,000, it's not a lot more routes than the 512,000, even if you make the adjustments. So if you have this kind of equipment in your network, you have to think about how you're going to upgrade that or reduce the number of routes that you need to be able to handle.
Okay, now let's talk a little bit about mitigation, consequences and mitigation. What are the consequences of a lot of routers hitting their 512K limit? Let's say worst case scenario, their administrator doesn't know how to adjust the interface card and they're stuck at that 512K. What happens to the network? What happens to the traffic passing through that network?
So the supervisor card, it'll do its best effort to keep as many routes in memory as possible. But however many more over that 512K limit there are, it's going to drop those. And you really can't control, even if you wanted to, which routes it drops. So what you'll see is there'll just be certain destinations that you just can't reach from your network that's sitting behind one of those routers.
Wow. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about mitigation. Of course, you've mentioned that you could tweak to get a few more routes of IPv4, but that's not a long-term solution. So is the only way to fix this to replace the equipment that you already have on your plant?
Well, essentially that's right. I mean, first of all, the command to change how many IPv4 routes the router can hold, first of all, requires a reboot. So it's already an invasive process that you have to execute in order to make this change. And then, like you said, yes, it's only temporary because we'll again reach a limit for whatever you've adjusted it to where it runs out of routing space again. So ultimately, you do have to think about what other hardware you're going to invest in that has a higher limit for the number of IPv4 routes. Now, this also leads us to another question or another potential solution, although it's not really a solution yet, which is you should be also thinking about IPv6 and how many routes that you need to handle on the IPv6 side. And that's because eventually, someday, we all hope that IPv6 replaces IPv4, and that would alleviate this problem at that point. But of course, that's long in the future. So when you invest in that new hardware, you need to be asking questions about not only how many IPv4 routes the equipment can handle, but also however many IPv6 routes the equipment can handle.
Wait, Brandon, that 512K limit, does that include the IPv6 routes as well as the IPv4 routes, or IPv6 routes stored in another set of memory?
That's right. It's stored in another set of memory. And the command that I'm referring to that adjusts that limit of 512K IPv4 routes actually takes those resources away from other routing tables. Oh. Now, by default, there's parts of the memory that most users aren't using that don't affect either IPv4 or IPv6 routes. So you can make the adjustment in most cases without giving up IPv6 routes. But that eventually becomes the clear problem if you're doing IPv4 and IPv6 that you will eventually reach that total and you'll have to steal from one to give to the other.
Right. So if you are committed to dual stacking, that's not really a solution at all, because you're eventually going to be trading off the ability to do dual stack with that little adjustment to get you some of those IPv4 routes. Now, let me bring Brian Chee into this. Cheebert, you do run a large network with a lot of routers and a lot of different organizations and branches. Have you run into this 512K limit yet on any of your equipment?
Actually, I don't. I unfortunately am not allowed to touch BGP, which is kind of sad. I've wanted to learn it. Right now, it's just black magic. Now, imagining what is going through what's happening is the Hawaii Internet Exchange is a peering location that's out by the Honolulu International Airport. And its sole purpose in life, it's actually only a single rack. It has routers in there so that the .com world can go to the .edu, can go to various other things. It is to avoid problems with, say, for instance, I needed to go and grab something from a corporation about a mile away. If it wasn't set up correctly, I would probably cross over in San Francisco and then have to come all the way back. If it's done correctly, I go through Hawaii Internet Exchange and then cross over to the .com world at the airport and head to the .com world. Yes, we have a lot of routes. Hawaii is actually unusual because we are a crossover point between Southern Cross, which is a big education research network in Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and so forth, and also NSFNet and the Internet 2 on the United States. So with twin OC192s going from Honolulu to the west coast of the US, and then an OC192 going to Japan, we have lots and lots and lots of routes passing through us. So I believe the last conversation I had with the University of Hawaii network architect is they have upgraded. They are actually running big honking Juniper routers, and they currently do not have that 512K limit.
Fantastic. Curtis, I want to get you really quickly into this discussion. Something just occurred to me as Cheebert was talking about how some of his organizations have upgraded to Juniper. What are the chances that this gets used as an excuse to upgrade a perfectly usable infrastructure that an IT person wants to see perhaps inherit the new features of some more of the advanced hardware?
Oh, I think there's a reasonable chance, because let's admit it, BGP is one of those things where, as Brian just said, even very experienced, very knowledgeable network pros often see BGP as, one of the inner mysteries of networking. For most executives, the IT director could come in and say that the supermoon had somehow pulled the internet off axis, and the executives would believe them. Tell them that Juniper hardware is heavier and therefore resists the pull of the moon a little bit more effectively, and you've got to check. So I think this will happen because the level of ignorance about BGP is profound. This is one of those many cases where the executives have to trust what the network architects and IT directors tell them. If the IT directors choose to use this as an opportunity to upgrade their network infrastructure, that's what's going to happen.
Brandon, we've got Sinak in the chat room who's saying that, if you're not careful, you can route the internet through your network. And that's actually happened before. Someone's made some bad BGP announcements. What do you think about BGP being this black art? What do you think about BGP now being this thing that is going to come to the forefront? As more and more networks start seeing more and more routes, and it's only going to increase, I think more system administrators are actually going to have to use BGP rather than just relying on gurus like yourself. Is BGP forever doomed to be that black art that no one is to speak of?
Well, I don't know. I would certainly be happy for all of you people who think it's a black art to call me. But I think you're somewhat right that there's going to be a little more interaction with BGP coming up. That has more to do with the pending depletion of IPv4 address space from the internet registries, because as that address space gets more and more scarce, we'll end up using smaller and smaller and smaller blocks of it, and that means we'll be getting blocks more often and needing to advertise or make changes to our BGP configuration more often. So I do expect that there will be somewhat of a spike in activity and BGP configuration activity, if you will, just because of the depletion of IPv4 space.
Brandon Ross from Network Utility Force. He is their chief network architect, and he is Twyat's Dark Lord of BGP. We want to thank you for coming on the show. Could you tell the folks really quickly where they can find you, find your company, and maybe contact you with questions that they might have about BGP?
Of course, www.netuf.net. You see the address right down here at the bottom of the screen somewhere, if I can get my finger right. But, we provide professional services around all kinds of routing, switching, and network infrastructure needs, everything from wireless LANs to BGP, and especially IPv6. And I did want to plug that I am doing a full-day IPv6 training class the Sunday before each North American Network Operators Group meeting for the next year or so. The next one is in Baltimore, in October 5th. So if you did want to learn more about IPv6, which someday will alleviate some of these IPv4 problems, then please join us in Baltimore.
That is a challenge. Again, thank you, Brandon Ross, and we'll see you next time when we need your wisdom.
Thanks a lot, Padre.
Now, when we come back, we're going to start getting closer to talking to Dan Holme from IT Unity. He's going to give us the inside track on what it takes to run your content management system. But before that, I thought we should take just a moment before we talk about our next supporter of This Week in Enterprise Tech to bring in a video from Black Hat 2014. We sent Brian Chee out on the show floor to talk to the boys at Fluke about some new technology that they've got and that they're using to identify rogue devices or unwanted devices on their networks. So, Brian Chee, take it away.
So I'm here today at Black Hat 2014, and we're talking to Malin Bisset of Fluke Networks, and we're going to look at what they're doing with Air Magnet Enterprise to shut down drones and Google Glass in your enterprise. Malin, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. What we have here is some very cool and interesting stuff. Air Magnet Enterprise is a 24/7 monitoring and security wireless analysis system. And with Internet of Things and Google Glass and drone, we have all kinds of new devices coming in, and our system allows you to detect and in some cases stop those from accessing your access points.
So one of the things a lot of our viewers have been asking is, how legal is this? Can you change the RF envelope so that it only affects your property?
Like BYOD, these new devices are here to stay. So it is really up to the policymakers within the enterprise to allow or to limit. But I don't think that you will be able to stop these devices from coming in. So what we need to offer to the enterprise are tools so that with the help of these tools, like the Air Magnet Enterprise, the IT managers will be able to know when these things like Google Glass come into the network and then stop it if required.
Fabulous. So what we've got is we're actually going to be looking at a demo a little later about how we can actually shut down the communications for a drone. And we're also going to take a look at what happens, what kind of alerts you get with the Google Glass. But the Air Magnet Enterprise is much, much more than just flashy stuff. It allows you to actually go in and apply policy to your Wi-Fi within your enterprise. Could you tell me a little bit more about how Air Magnet does this, what's involved?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Air Magnet Enterprise is what we would call a wireless network assurance system, which means that because these days your wireless LAN is mission critical, you have to make sure that your wireless LAN is available all the time for legal use. And as a part of wireless network assurance, what that system does is it does intrusion prevention. It does intrusion detection, it does rogue detection, it does traffic analysis, it does forensics, it does reporting, it does compliance, and a whole bunch of other things.
Well, this is certainly really exciting. And, I've played with Air Magnet Enterprise over the years when I was doing reviews. And I'll tell you, being able to shut down drones, apply your policy to people spying on you or Google Glass is a very exciting thing. So, if our viewers wanted to go and see more about your product, where can they go?
The best thing to do would be to go to our website, www.flukenetworks.com, and look for the product information.
Well, this has been Brian Chee for This Week in Enterprise Technology. Very exciting stuff at the Fluke Networks booth. Love to see Air Magnet Enterprise more in my lab.
Cheever, we've been playing with a lot of the Air Magnet gear for the better part of a decade and a half. It's absolutely fantastic equipment, and I really like this ability, this ability to scan through your network through these new devices that are popping up that really have no place on an enterprise network. Are they going to send you something to play with at all?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but the cool thing about Air Magnet Enterprise and a lot of systems like it is that you no longer have to have special radios. A lot of the systems, you can actually repurpose a radio. Instead of being a Wi-Fi node, it can actually be an air probe. So our friends at Xeris do this. Cisco definitely does it. A lot of times in a big Cisco environment, they'll actually assign APs, entire APs with both radios to be Wi-Fi probes. And by putting those tiny things in, you can go and take a harder look at just how your network is performing. Now, I am going to give a shout out to our friend Mike Redlick over at Signal 7. They've got a new type of Wi-Fi probe that allows you to actually run simulated synthetic traffic over your network to do network assurance from the user standpoint. So, Mike, looking forward to actually reviewing your different users. And they have various sizes. They even have a tiny one based on a Raspberry Pi that you can put in, say, like a CEO's office, so you can run tests to make sure that the CEO stays happy.
Now, Curtis, I want to throw one question over to you again on the enterprise side. One of the talks that we heard at Black Hat, it was a keynote address by Mr. Gear. He's an independent security researcher. He was talking about how enterprises need to start thinking about where their crucial infrastructure is and how they protect their crucial infrastructure. Specifically, he was talking about spreading out what we believe to be crucial infrastructure to the edge of the network. But another one of the concepts that he brought up was this idea of complete visibility of all devices that are using network resources. It would seem to me that this is one of those areas that that most enterprises are not really good at. We have wireless. Maybe we've locked it down. Maybe we've done our job of putting it onto a separate VLAN. But for the most part, there's not a lot of effort made to control, to catalog, or to otherwise authorize wireless devices that wander in and out of our wireless networks. Is this something that you see being a need, or is this not even on the radar scope of most CIOs and CTOs?
Well, I think it's certainly a need. Whether it's on their radar or not, I think it depends greatly on where they are. You know, this is one of those areas where a lot of network folks and a lot of IT executives even treat wireless networks like wired networks without realizing a lot of the basic differences. I mean, it's very easy to have one level of authentication and security if someone must actually physically jack a cable into a port in order to make a connection. When they can get out there and with some of the sophisticated tools, make physical connection, find the network, make physical connection, and then begin the process of getting in through counterfeit credentials, you know, that's a much different level of problem. And it's one that a lot of executives don't want to address. The real root of the problem comes with this whole notion of radio. Most IT people, and I would say virtually all executives, are absolutely ignorant when it comes to radio. Most IT folks, they're pretty good with digital stuff. Radio, not so much. So anything like this that can help with the radio side, whether it's discovering client devices, helping figure out what the limits of your coverage are, figuring out where holes, barriers, all of those things exist, then it's a step in the right direction and a step towards allowing the enterprise to control its own radio destiny rather than simply depending upon the occasional outside expert to come in and tell them where things are right and wrong.
Coming up right next is IT Unity and Dan Holme, who wants to explain why you need to consider what you want out of your CMS. But before that, let's take a moment to thank the second sponsor of the Twiat Riot, and that's ZipRecruiter. Are you hiring? Do you know where to post to find the best qualified candidates, the best fit for your organization? Because it's not just about finding a skill set or finding a warm body to fill the seat. You need to make sure that that person, that man, that woman is going to fit the culture of your startup or your enterprise, your small business, whatever it may be. Posting your job in one place just isn't enough to find that right candidate. Now, if you want that perfect hire, you need to post your job on all the top job sites, and now you can. That's where ZipRecruiter can help. With ZipRecruiter.com, you post your job to 50-plus job sites, including Craigslist, LinkedIn, and Twitter, all with a single click. As I was saying before, you need to make sure that the candidates coming into your pipeline are suitable, not just for what they can do, but for what they can offer to your company, what they can offer to your workplace. It's all about the cultural fit. That's what's going to determine a good hire from a nightmare. ZipRecruiter helps you to find those candidates in any city, any industry, nationwide. Just post once and watch your qualified candidates roll in to ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use interface. There's no juggling emails or calls to your office. You can quickly screen candidates, rate them, and hire the right person on the spot. Find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by over 200,000 businesses. Right now, our listeners can try ZipRecruiter for a free 4-day trial. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/Twiat. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Twiat and try to get your personnel needs met today. We thank ZipRecruiter for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's get to the meat of the show. We're bringing in Dan Holme, the co-founder of IT Unity. Dan, thank you for talking to us. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much. Aloha from Hawaii.
Aloha.
I'm on Maui, just a few hundred miles away from Bryan.
Now, a few hundred miles. So did you get whacked by the big storms coming through?
Yeah, we were a little bit closer to the storms than Oahu, but it was the Big Island, which is one of the less populated islands with the most landmass and the volcanoes that bore the brunt of the storm. So they still have some areas without power and without utilities. We escaped relatively unharmed.
Thankfully, because we had you scheduled for this week. We had to bring you in. Now, Dan,
Yeah,
could you tell me really quickly, what is IT Unity? I mean, I've seen the site. I know the buzzwords. I understand that you work with SharePoint. But why did you create IT Unity?
IT Unity was really created in order to help businesses solve problems with technology. Because what we're finding is that in order to really address business problems, you need to unify, so to speak, not only a variety of technologies, including SharePoint, Office 365, Microsoft products, and non-Microsoft products and platforms, but you also have to create a conversation that involves multiple people in an enterprise. The IT staff, the development, the business executives, the platform owners, and most importantly, the actual business users who are trying to get something done. And to date, there aren't really very many sites that really are focused on the business first and the technology second. And our goal is really going to be able to do that, so that if you're trying to solve a specific problem, for your business. You're going to be able to go to one place and find out how to do it best with the tools and the investments you've made in technology.
We've run into that problem a lot on this show when we start talking about people trying to cram a business model into an existing infrastructure, be it Joomla or Drupal or even WordPress that people have used as technical content management systems. That never works out really, really well. You've gone a different route. You've decided to use SharePoint. So SharePoint is your underlying structure, and then you customize for businesses depending on their needs. Can you tell me why you chose SharePoint?
Well, IT Unity is focused on SharePoint first in order, primarily because we have a number of amazing relationships in the SharePoint and Office 365 space, but we're going to be broadening our focus to multiple technologies again in the very near future. But the real key here is that SharePoint is unique as a technology in the fact that it has a community that already exhibits some of the characteristics we hope to foster in other technology spaces. There already is a fairly strong dialogue and debate even between development, IT, and the business. There's an understanding that the complexities require everyone to come together. So we went live only about 3 months ago, and we decided to start in that space. There's also, of course, a huge market share in that space that we're able to support a lot of people doing very exciting things with the technology. So we're supporting businesses in that space. And to be clear, our site actually doesn't use SharePoint. We believe that in order to solve business problems, you need to understand your requirements and build or buy the best technology for that business problem. So our site is actually not running on SharePoint, but we support a lot of people who use SharePoint in enterprises across all kinds of workloads. Okay.
Dan, let's take a step back, because our audience, they get really, really twitchy whenever they feel like they're being fed PR. And I want to make sure that they understand that your expertise goes far beyond just talking about a single platform or talking about synergy. Yeah. Give me a concrete example of what IT Unity could do for me. So let's say I'm running a branch office. It's got 30 people in it. You know, we've got programmers, we've got a couple of engineers, we've got a couple of business managers. What problems do I have, and what problems would IT Unity help me solve?
Problems in a remote office are going to, and I assume you're talking in your scenario about a remote office of a larger organization or a remote small business?
A remote office of a larger organization.
Okay. You're going to have a number of problems related to the fact that you've got a group of people who are reliant on data to get their job done, and that data might be residing far away from the physical location of that business. And so you've got questions about how do we ensure, for example, good performance across the enterprise so that those 30 people are able to get their jobs done as fast and as effectively as people in other offices or in the hub. You're going to have concerns about remote access and security. You're going to have concerns about how to ensure that if the WAN link goes down, you've still got access to the most critical data that you need to get your jobs done. So there's a lot of things that a remote office or a branch office needs to support the unique characteristics of the workforce there that are going to require a number of technologies to come together. It's not all going to be SharePoint, and it's not all going to be even Windows. It's going to be Cisco routers, perhaps, or Juniper routers, and having to deal with some of the uniquenesses there. And so our goal is really going to be to pivot the conversation away from talking about the technology to talking about exactly what you're saying, which is here's our scenario, here's what we're trying to get done, and what can we do to get it done. And that's going to be our goal. Right now, again, our content is new. We're focused on a couple of popular technology platforms, and in order to really support all those scenarios and that a branch office would have, we're going to be bringing in a lot of additional expertise across other technologies.
Okay, all right. Now, so we've actually heard about this business model before. The whole idea of bringing in a specialized consultancy that can streamline how we work, specifically within a larger organization that is maybe already a little set in its ways. I want to bring in some of the other hosts here to have a little talk about this. Let's start with you, Chee. So, again, you work at an organization that decidedly has a lot of inertia. What are some of the things that you've recognized that you wish you could change, that you wish you could get over that inertial hump and say, look, we got to change the way we do this because this is not meeting best practices?
Well, first and foremost, what I want to point out is too many people consider SharePoint just a content management system. It is far from that. It is one piece is content management, but SharePoint is one of those systems that can be very nicely woven into the fabric of your organization. So let me use an example. I was working on a project to do a renovation of a lab. So I was actually working with the architectural firm. They actually gave me a SharePoint login so that we could have not only a shared file space, we could also have shared discussions. We also had the ability that by username, by user identity, we were brought up into a homepage that had organization and user-specific information already on the homepage for me. Now, this is kind of the fruit that everybody wants to have. Everybody wants their CMS to be able to do this, but in the case of Drupal and Joomla, there's been a lot of crowbarring of extra features. You know, how do you get it to talk to LDAP? How do you get it to talk to this? How do you get it to talk to that? How do you do workflow routing? And I say to those people, it's like SharePoint actually has a lot of that stuff already built in. And the problem that I see with SharePoint is there's not enough information out there. And that's why I got so excited when my friend Karen Forrester, hi Karen, told me about IT Unity. And there seems to be a community building, and I'm getting excited about reading more and more on how to do this, how to do that, how this works in this type of function, so that you can concentrate more on business and less on the technology, but the technology can still solve problems for you.
Right, right. Curtis, let me throw over to you for a second here. We're talking about the management of your business process, the streamlining of your business process so that you can have proper communications and you go through the right chain of command inside of an individual organization. How important are consultancies like IT Unity to enterprise?
Well, I think in most cases they're very important because it is not cost effective for most organizations to keep SharePoint expertise on staff. You know, in general, there's a particular level of expertise that's going to be called upon to set up a SharePoint instance or a group of SharePoint instances and do the migration of an existing system into SharePoint. And that migration of an existing system into SharePoint is, I think, a critical piece of the whole thing. It can also be very useful to an organization to have an outside group come in and really walk through the whole notion of the business process. You know, when you do a process like a SharePoint installation, you've got two pieces of it. One is the technology side, setting up the SharePoint servers and setting up all the rules and doing all the programming. The other side is really taking a look at your entire business process infrastructure. Back in the 80s and 90s, we talked a great deal about business process re-engineering, BPR. And it was a huge way for companies to spend bazillions of dollars on consultants, and it still is. The need hasn't gone away. It's just sort of faded in the extent to which we talk about it. But if an organization does something like moving to SharePoint and doesn't take the opportunity to really look hard at their business processes, then they're missing one of the great opportunities to sit down and say, are we doing the right things in the right way before we talk about what sort of technology infrastructure we're going to use to implement them?
All right, now let's take a step back. Dan, I want to talk about some of the emergences of business tools, especially in the cloud. Like, for example, we've seen a big push by Microsoft into Office 365. And within that 365 suite, we've got a fantastic set of collaboration tools, everything from SharePoint to OneNote. You know, it's sort of become part of the ante to do business today that you have these tools at your disposal and that you know how to use them. Knowing that, where do you fit in? So, I mean, I see a lot of these collaboration tools. I don't see a lot of motion towards actually using them to their fullest. I've seen people use SharePoint as the most simple kind of CMS, even though I know it can do so much more. Is that where IT Unity is going to find its niche?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. The challenge with technology over the past decades really is that people, of course, use a very small portion of the capability of the technology, partly because they don't understand what it can do. And to reiterate what Carl said, there's been this lack of, well, let me put it this way: businesses have wanted to buy Kool-Aid. They've wanted to buy a silver bullet that solves their problems without taking a moment to really look at what they're actually trying to do. And that business process reengineering that we started in the 80s and 90s got derailed by technology. And technology was so heavy and so expensive that it got moved into the IT department. And the IT department, was expected to deliver these silver bullets, but then they weren't able to ask the hard questions and get the difficult answers from the business. So IT was trying to figure out how to solve problems without the business really defining those problems. Now, what's interesting about the cloud, to your point, is that the cloud is now democratizing technology. And what used to be a very heavy infrastructure to create and maintain on-premise is now available with an email address and a very small credit card as a subscription. So the technology is going back into the business, and the business customers are now purchasing and acquiring those technologies, which means the trend here is that they're having to start taking responsibility for the success of those technologies, and they're starting to be forced to really ask themselves, what are they really trying to do? And is these little services that they're buying really addressing their problems? So the dynamic is really shifting to where the business, again, is focused on the problem. The technology is easier to acquire to solve that problem. And now you've got people who are not technically savvy trying to understand the interface of what they're trying to do with the technology. And that's exactly where we come in, is trying to help people understand the questions they're trying to ask and find answers from the most trusted names in the space. And so we bring in people from all over the globe who are well-known experts in the field. We provide their content to a global audience. And that audience, whether it's a business user, an IT pro, an executive, or developer, is going to be able to find the answer to that question there. So we're really trying to be the grease in that wheel to help get things moving again so the business can, in fact, identify its problems and solve them.
Now, Dan, I understand what you're trying to do. I understand what you're saying, and I believe in it. But then we've also got, like, for example, we've got MAVHC in the chat room who brings out a point that it's not uncommon. I've actually heard this a lot. He says, look, all SharePoint instances that he's ever played with have either crashed forever or were never used. And that's the part that still kind of irks me, because we have so many young enterprises and so many startups that do have access to these previously very infrastructure-heavy solutions, now super easy to do in the cloud, that don't seem to be using them, and they don't seem to be moving towards using them. Have you seen a movement, a critical mass of organizations that are starting to use SharePoint? Because I remember there's a Microsoft employee who was trying to explain to me at a conference once that when you start to see businesses who know how to use something like SharePoint get an advantage on their competitors, then you'll start to see the rapid adoption of something like SharePoint. Are we there yet? Are we at that point where people recognize the competitive advantage of using something like SharePoint?
I think they're starting to. I think, again, you've really hit it, that people move from a variety of legacy systems, most commonly just file servers, into SharePoint, and used really only the document storage capability of SharePoint and maybe some of the very light list capability of SharePoint without scratching the surface of its other capabilities. And now that they've made that transition, two things are happening. One is they're looking at this big investment they made and going, gosh, we're not getting much out of this. What else can it do? And the second is, now that the economy is better and businesses are starting to move again, they're starting to see the problems they're facing and looking for a solution. And one of the challenges is that Microsoft is out there saying, oh, this is a silver bullet that can solve all your problems. And in many cases, it can solve a lot of problems, but the business needs to find a way to understand exactly how that's done. And it takes understanding, again, the business problem, and also understanding that SharePoint is a platform. It is that is very capable, but it's often going to take a little bit of development or some third-party tools to plug in the solutions that people need. So, SharePoint on its own is great, but you add Yammer, you add some third-party workflow tools, and all of a sudden you have a real powerful capability to enable the business to move forward.
All right. Chee, I want to bring you back in here because Dan touched on something that I really like, the fact that you can sort of introduce to your users those low-hanging fruits, the document sharing and the project sharing and the calendar sharing, contact sharing that's inherent within the SharePoint suite. But I remember you told me once that in order for SharePoint to become effective in any enterprise, it can't just be limited to IT. I can't remember who it was, but there was someone in the chat room who was saying SharePoint's biggest weakness is that there are many executives who think the IT department is just supposed to make it awesome. They're supposed to take SharePoint and say, now it's everywhere, so boom, everyone uses it. You told me once that until everyone in the enterprise realizes what SharePoint does for their particular department, it's never going to gain that traction.
Well, SharePoint, if there's any one statement that should describe SharePoint, is its corporate memory. You need to have stakeholders throughout the enterprise. It can't just be IT driving this. You need to think of SharePoint as a tool to provide timely information, the appropriate information, customized to the user and what their work job is, what their job is, and to customize workflows. This can't happen just at the IT level. This has to be up at the management seat. The management has to sit down with IT and actually understand what SharePoint can do and then work on implementing. It is not something you're going to snap your fingers and do. SharePoint is a system. If you're used to the type of investment, say in SAP, SharePoint has can have a similar layer of enterprise threading, shall we say. SharePoint, when done really, really well, becomes part of the community, becomes part of the ecosystem of the corporation, so that you can reduce the amount of paper. So what I really wish the university would do is, when you're a new hire, learning how to find out where to get parking passes or where to get a account on this machine or that machine is just a long, god-awful process. But in certain universities where they have gone with SharePoint, new hires automatically get added to a new hire list, and key pieces of information show up on their home portal. Very, very, very powerful, and potentially can save you a ton of money if done correctly.
Right. Let me throw it over to Curtis, and then Dan, I want to bring this question to you. We've got Esol in the chat room, who again I think sums it up very, very well. He says that his old company had a SharePoint server, but that it never got used, and management barely knew how to use it. This is not really unique. I've seen this a lot, where you've got a very strong solution, a very strong technological solution that's in play, but the ones that are most difficult to convince to use it are executive and the management level. I mean, as good as SharePoint can be, if the management doesn't want to use it, if they can't convince themselves to learn it, it's never going to catch on, right?
Well, that's very true. And I think one of the other things that I've seen is the question of who owns the SharePoint. I'm aware of one recent very large shift to SharePoint, where a particular organization within a large enterprise took control. They took responsibility for making the SharePoint conversion happen. The problem is, when they did it, they were the ones who talked to the consultants, and therefore the entire installation addressed their needs. It didn't address the needs of other departments at all. And when it was pointed out that the way they had done the SharePoint installation was requiring great amounts of repetitive activity in the other departments, leading to greater chances of errors and much higher cost, their response was, well, sorry, we don't have enough money to go back and do it right. When you're doing something as big as a proper SharePoint installation, the notion of buy-in from top to bottom and all the way across the organization is critical. If you allow any one group, any one level within the organization to own the SharePoint installation and to drive its development, then you are absolutely guaranteed to end up in this situation where everyone else sees the flaws in SharePoint and ultimately refuses to use what has become a very, very expensive white elephant in the IT room.
Dan, I want to throw this at your feet. So this is something, I'm glad that we were finally able to put a name to it. This unwillingness to think of SharePoint as more than just a simple technical solution that lets you share files, but rather a top to bottom revamping of how you do business. This is, I think, the challenge that I'd like to throw at you. What are the best practices to go through small, medium business, from the small business to the enterprise, to get them to do what's good for them and adopt something, if not SharePoint, something like it?
Well, I think everyone has identified exactly the core of the problem, and I'd like to propose that I think SharePoint is the last platform that organizations are ever likely to have acquired on premise, because we're at this tipping point now where we're trying to solve business problems with a technology, and either the business, the management, goes out to a Microsoft roadshow, drinks all the Kool-Aid, comes back and says, buy this platform and make it awesome. Or IT sees its potential, implements it, and doesn't know how to sell it to the business. It has to start with the fundamental question of what are we trying to do? And honestly, I think best practice number one is if a business can't define what it's trying to do, what's important, why, and what the risks are associated with either doing it or not doing it, there's no reason to move forward. Business has got to get to the point where it makes investments in technology based on a thorough understanding of what they're trying to do, the value, the cost, and the risk propositions associated with each technology they're evaluating, and only then can any technology be successful. And SharePoint has a lot of stuff to offer if it's done right, but businesses simply haven't made the first important step, which is to really define what they're trying to do. And that takes buy-in, it takes discussion, and it certainly takes a lot of ownership outside of IT to make that happen.
I love that. That right there, that's the takeaway. The fact that the question here isn't, are we going to use SharePoint or are we going to use something like SharePoint? The question is, do we even know what our business is anymore? Because I think you're right. I think once you actually start to break it down of this is what we do, this is what we offer, this is how we offer it. Once you do that, then SharePoint becomes easy. It's, well, yeah, of course, naturally SharePoint, or again, a workflow tool like SharePoint fits really well into that structure. But if you can't even answer that, if you don't know what it is that you do, if you don't know what your business is trying to be, if you don't know where you want to take your startup or your enterprise, then yeah, SharePoint's an impossible sell. Cheebert, what about that? Actually, open question to Cheebert or Curtis. What about that? How do we tell enterprises, hey guys, you need to sort out your own issues before you can adopt this?
I always tell people you've got to be able to write down a needs and a wants list. You need to be able to put it in a box before you can automate it. And reality is IT Unity isn't selling tools. They aren't selling SharePoint. What they are bringing to the table is a community for people that have made the commitment, that want to make the commitment to using SharePoint as an integral part of their corporation or organization. They're providing a way to talk to experts, people that have gone through it, people that are willing to share their knowledge so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over again. I think actually IT Unity might be the key piece that's been missing from the SharePoint community for a long, long time. How to share everybody else's experiences.
What about it, Curtis? Is this the way to force buy-in? This introspective look at your corporate philosophy?
I have a little bit of trouble with the idea of forcing buy-in. I think you have to seduce groups into being there and buying in by showing them how this is going to make their business life better. We've lost a lot of institutional memory. This whole discussion about SharePoint reminds me incredibly of a lot of the discussions that were going on around ERP back in the 90s. Companies were having the same debates over how to move, where to move, all the expense around moving, some of the disasters around moving. I know I was still testifying in cases as recently as 10 years ago from companies that were literally brought down by bad ERP installs back in the mid-90s. SharePoint, as we've heard, is a tool. And it is only a tool to the extent that it's put to the proper use within an organization. In order to do that, you have to understand what problems the organization needs to solve and how SharePoint, properly configured and administered, can solve those without an awful lot of discussion and institutional introspection beforehand. You're almost guaranteed the kind of experience that is going to lead to the CIO and several high-level IT managers reworking their resumes because they're looking for a new job.
Dan, I want to give you the last word on this discussion. I want to give you the ability to tell people why they should stop by IT Unity when they're starting to look at their next business process installation. Why should they go to you? Why should they listen to your writers? Why should they look at your recommendations? What is the secret sauce that's going to help them when they decide to install SharePoint or whatever other solution they decide to go with?
Well, thanks for giving me that opportunity. I think it's really about what Brian mentioned, which is the ability for people to share their collective experience with each other. IT Unity really is about bringing together the community, the people who actually use the technology and have used it in a variety of geographies and industries and organizational sizes, who can talk about the challenges they face, ask questions, and get those questions answered by some of the top experts in the world. And also to understand how all the pieces fit together, because SharePoint doesn't exist in a vacuum. You've got other technologies, other approaches to solving business problems that you need to be able to understand in context. And what we really will bring to the stage that hasn't been done before is that unified in-context perspective of helping you understand where it is that you fit in, what you might need to know that you don't know, that you thought that you didn't know, and what you need to know next after you learn this. So in-context, expert and trusted solutions to your business problems.
Dan Holme from IT Unity, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, but you've used up another hour listening to the best dang podcast for the enterprise in the universe. That's according to 9 out of 10 SharePoint installations. I want to thank the panelists for coming in to share their opinion, to share their knowledge, but most of all, just to share the time geeking out over enterprise technology. Let's start with you, Brian. Where can the Twiat Riot find you? What are you up to? And how's your book doing?
Well, I got the Chinese translation of the first book.
That's always good.
Haven't finished the second book. Yes, bad Cheebert. But anyway, I do want to give a shout out to Karen Forster. I should point out that IT Unity actually has a heck of a lot of Microsoft people working with it. So in many, many, many cases, the writers actually help design portions of SharePoint. So I can't think of a better place to go if you are contemplating SharePoint. Just hop into the community and discuss it with people who actually helped design it. And some of the communities, tons and tons of Microsoft MVPs, might as well use some of that experience.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. Curtis Franklin, first of all, I want to tell people that if they haven't already dropped by Information Week and found your coverage of Black Hat, they absolutely have to do that. It's top-notch, and it really gives you a feel for what was going on at the conference. And this was a good year. Okay, can you tell the folks where they can find you, where they can find your broadcasts, and what you're up to?
Well, Padre, I appreciate that. It was a good year, and we're going to be continuing with a series that we call The Best of the Rest of Black Hat. You can find it at darkreading.com, Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. We've got that for at least the next 2 weeks and probably the first week of September as well. We've got plenty of interviews in the can, and most of those interviewees are going to be there during the show, chatting with people in the live text chat. So we'd love to have the crew from Twiat come on over and take part in that. In addition, looking forward to the next show, we're doing some interop preview shows at Information Week. Most of those are on Thursdays at 2 o'clock Eastern. This week it happens to be Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern to accommodate our guest schedule. But we got lots of stuff going on. We always have information on upcoming shows, and we would love it if people would join us, not just to listen, but to take part in the conversation. We love to have new voices in the discussion around the topics we cover.
And Dan Holme, we want to thank you again for joining us. Could you please let the Twilight Riot know where they can find IT Unity, where they can find all your top-notch analysis, and maybe where they could find out what you're doing?
Yeah, thank you so much for including me. And anyone who wants to find out what we're doing can go to itunity.com. Our social handles are itunity01 on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And you can learn more about me at danholme.com and my side hobbies working for the Olympics at NBC Olympics and here in Hawaii. Thanks a lot for letting me join you today.
Curtis, Dan, and Cheever, thank you again. Thank you so very much for joining me for another hour of Geekitude. And also thanks to you, to our loyal listener, our watcher, the person who downloads This Week in Enterprise Tech each and every single week. We wouldn't have a show without you, and we thank you especially for spreading the news. This is becoming a fantastic way to get your enterprise fix, and it's all because of you. So we want to do something for you. We want to make it easier for you to get the episodes that you want in the devices of your choosing. Just go to our show page at twit.tv/Twyat. There you will find a drop-down menu that gives you all the options to get every episode automatically into your iPhone or your iPod, your tablet, your Android device, your laptop, your Mac, your PC, whatever it may be. We've got a version for you. Do you want to listen to it in the car? Well, then download it to your phone. Do you want to watch it on a tablet? Well, we've got a small video file for that. And do you want to watch it in all its HD glory? Well, you can do that too. It's part of the things that we do for you because we love our Twilight Riot. Also, did you know that you could follow me on Twitter? If you go to twitter.com/PadreSJ, that's at PadreSJ, you'll find my Twitter feed complete with what we're doing each week on This Week in Enterprise Tech. You'd also be able to suggest topics for future shows. In fact, many of our guests come from your suggestions. So jump in there, subscribe, and tell me what you want to see on Twilight. You'll also be able to find me, what I'm doing in between shows. All the other shows that I do here on the Twit TV network, you'll find it right there, twitter.com/PadreSJ. Also, did you know that we do the show live? Every Monday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. You can find us at live.twit.tv. If you watch us live, you can watch the pre-show, the post-show, and all the bloopers that we take out of the final download. It gives you a little bit of a feel for the community of Twit. And as long as you're going to be part of the community of Twit, why not jump into the chat room at irc.twit.tv. As you saw me during the show, I pull questions straight out from the chat room because I like to listen to my audience and find out what they want to ask our guests. It's part of the interactive, wonderful nature that is the test of Twit. Finally, I want to thank everyone here at the Brick House who makes this show possible, to Leo and Lisa for, well, letting me play around with the studio, for my super producer, Karsten, and of course, my absolutely fantabulous TD, Mr. Jason Howell. Jason Howell of, I can't really say you're from one show anymore because you got a lot of shows here on Twit.
Don't we all have a lot of shows going on here at Twit right now?
We kind of do, but I mean, between the TD and let's see, you also do TN2, you do All About Android, you do Android App Arena. When do you sleep, sir?
That's a really good question, and that's not necessarily a problem of Twit. That's a problem of being a parent of young children.
Yes.
But yes, hey, you said the Android shows that I do. So All About Android and Android App Arena. Just go to twit.tv and check out all of our shows, and you'll find a couple of Android shows in that list as well.
And ladies and gentlemen, that is the face of a man who has slept 30 minutes in the last week because he loves his daughter. There we go. Until next time, I'm Father Robert Ballecer, reminding you that if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep quiet.